If it's Tuesday, President Trump delivers a long, wide-ranging speech at the United Nations, criticizing the body for failing to act as wars escalate in Gaza and Ukraine, along with many familiar lines on climate and immigration, while insisting only he can solve global crises. Plus, a disturbing scene in a Florida courtroom. The man convicted of trying to assassinate President Trump on a golf course last year was found guilty on all 5 counts, then tried to stab himself with a pen as the verdict was read. And the public health and political fallout from the president's announcement on acetaminophen use during pregnancy. We will dissect what the science really says about autism spectrum disorder and claims about one of the world's most widely used over-the-counter medications. Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, and we're going to begin at the United Nations, where President Trump addressed the annual gathering of world leaders, touting his administration's accomplishments and what he called the, quote, golden age of America, while laying out a list of grievances about the UN and many traditional U.S. allies, including the handling of foreign wars, immigration, and climate change. Today was President Trump's first time addressing the UN General Assembly since returning to the White House. In a speech that lasted nearly an hour, the president started by questioning the mission of the UN.
I ended 7 wars, and in all cases, they were raging with countless thousands of people being killed. What is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential. But it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action.
This all comes as ceasefire deals to end the wars in the Mideast and Ukraine continue to elude the president. President Trump once again putting pressure on Hamas to end the war in Gaza, accusing Hamas of repeatedly rejecting reasonable offers to make peace, while also criticizing U.S. allies, including Canada, the U.K., Australia, and France, who broke with the U.S. and announced they will formally recognize a Palestinian state.
Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
And on the conflict in Ukraine, President Trump reiterated his threat to impose major consequences on Russia if it doesn't end the war, but only if U.S. partners in Europe agreed to follow suit.
Inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products, which, as you know, I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't happy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one? In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures.
Now, during a meeting on the sidelines of the General Assembly, President Zelensky said that he supports President Trump's call for Europe to stop buying Russian oil and gas and emphasized the needs for sanctions on Moscow. Following that meeting, President Trump appeared to dramatically shift his posture on Ukraine's ability to win the war. Posting on social media, "I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option." It also comes after the president said that NATO should take on offensive posture toward recent Russian incursion into its airspace. Take a listen.
Mr. President, do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
Would you back them up? Would the United States help them out in some way?
Depends on the circumstance, but, we're very strong toward NATO.
Seems to be quite the shift from the president. Let's talk about it now. Joining me, NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. He's outside the UN building. Also with me is NBC News Chief Washington correspondent and Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell, and Evelyn Farkas, the executive director of the McCain Institute and a former assistant secretary of defense for Russia and Ukraine. So, Vaughn, give me your biggest takeaways from the president's speech to the UN today.
There is definitely the American nationalist element here, that the president boasting about the success of the United States, suggesting that he had effectively secured the United States border and that history has shown that he is, quote, right about everything, and that other countries should do more to listen to him when it comes to migration, when it comes to energy policy, when it comes to military might and investments in military defenses. This was a president of the United States that struck a different chord than he did even 5 years ago when he was promoting the idea of America first and peace through strength. In this moment, the president of the United States making it very clear here that the United States is going to work with individuals who he likes. He said as much here. And this was one there when talking about migration. It was very much of a nativist argument that he was making, that America needs to defend Americans and that the other countries' troubles should stay in those countries and be solved by those countries and not create new problems, in his words, inside of the U.S. or other countries' borders. I want to let you listen to a little bit more of him talking about migration.
Not only is the UN not solving the problems it should, too often, it's actually creating new problems for us to solve. The best example is the #1 political issue of our time, the crisis of uncontrolled migration. It's uncontrolled. Your countries are being ruined. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. See, I can tell you. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
He went on to question what the purpose of the United Nations is, saying that they have much greater potential than they are currently being used for. At the same time, it's his administration that has cut more than $500 million in funding to the UN in the first 7 months of this administration. Of course, he has also cut humanitarian and international aid, as well as shuttered USAID. His administration has been very defensive of those cuts. And as you heard the president there in his nearly hour-long remarks, urge other countries to take on more responsibility for what happens only within their own borders, but within their regions.
But, Vaughn, at the same time that he gave a speech that certainly had a nationalist streak to it, he also seemed to change his tone when it came to Ukraine. Talk us through that. What led to that?
Over the course of just a couple hours, he changed his tune. During his actual remarks, he suggested what he has for the better part of 5 months now, that Russia needed to end its war and enter into a ceasefire or face the threat of additional sanctions. But he did not announce in front of this General Assembly any new sanctions or secondary sanctions on China, for instance. Instead, you have watched this deadline that he had imposed on Russia repeatedly to end its war continue to come and go. And yet, over the course of just the last 2 hours, you then saw him sit there next to President Zelensky and suggest that the U.S. would back the invoking of Article 5 if a NATO country were to face further Russian aircraft incursions, as Romania, Estonia, and Poland have all reported in the last 2 weeks. There's a question about aircraft's drones that shut down the Copenhagen airport today and whether those were Russian-controlled here. And so the president suggesting that he would back the shooting down of Russian aircraft, which even caused Zelensky to turn his head and look at the American president. And then after that meeting, in that social media post, President Trump doing a complete 180 on what he had said from what he had said in early August, when he had suggested that Zelensky was going to have to agree to, quote, land swap with Russia in order to get to an end to the war. Here today now openly suggesting that there is the potential that with continued financing and military equipment, that Ukraine has the potential of taking back the land that Russia has seized. And so we have still not heard the U.S. president suggest he is going to help finance that effort or provide new military equipment to back that effort, that offensive effort here, nor did he announce those additional sanctions on Russia at the same time. This is quite a stark trajectory from where the president was, not just back in February, but even where he was a month and a half ago as he welcomed Vladimir Putin onto the U.S. soil.
And also pretty very much out of line with his general America First policy, which in many ways was born out of the conflict in Ukraine, at least for his base. How could the president's base respond to what they heard today? Obviously, they're probably very happy with this speech, but the remarks and the social media posts about Ukraine have to rankle some of his most diehard supporters.
Right. And I think that that is where there is the question about how exactly they respond. We have heard people like Marjorie Taylor Greene say she doesn't care what happens in Ukraine. And now suddenly the American president is suggesting that the U.S. could back further efforts. And of course, these would not be short-term efforts. These would undoubtedly take mass amounts of military assets and financial commitment from the United States. And when the president said that he wants to see more from Europe when it comes to cutting off Russian oil and gas purchases completely, we should note that over the last 4 years, there has been a major, major drop. But one of the biggest buyers that remains out of Europe of Russian oil and gas is Hungary, which has now been a political ally, Viktor Orban, of President Trump. And he was asked whether he would have that conversation with Viktor Orban, and he said he would. And so I think this really calls into question. This was just a few hours that we have heard the president, but will he actually change his tenor on this over a prolonged period of time? That will only be seen over the course of weeks here. But I think this is statements that are very much welcomed by the Ukrainian delegation here in New York City, and one that the Russian delegation, I think, was definitely going to be having conversations about the seriousness to which the president is willing to back up the words that he is speaking here in New York.
Yeah. All right. So, Evan, let's get you to weigh in on this, because it's hard to believe that just a few months ago, the president and the vice president were openly fighting with Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office. Now we have this dramatic shift tone, basically the president endorsing what Ukraine's goals are in this war to get its original territory back. Just how significant is this shift?
Well, it's interesting to me. I don't know how significant it is, Ryan, because as you pointed out, and others have pointed out, the assistance spigot, the military assistance to Ukraine, has not been turned on. And President Trump has basically said, well, the Europeans have to go first when it comes to sanctions, which, is not really what most of us who want Ukraine to prevail are calling for. We would like U.S. assistance right now on the military front and sanctions against Russia right now. But I think what might be happening is, remember, it looks like there was about an hour meeting with the two presidents, President Zelensky and President Trump. Also, remember, Mike Waltz is now there as UN ambassador, a man with a lot of military background and experience when it comes to national security issues. President Trump may be getting some briefings on what's happening on the ground in Ukraine and what's happening behind the enemy lines or the line of contact inside Russia. And what I'm getting at is that Russia's not doing well militarily, and Ukraine's actually been taking some ground back in that area near Kursk, where they were kicked out by the North Koreans, and that the Ukrainian strikes against the Russian oil facilities have been really clever, and they've actually hit some refineries that the Russians would not be able to get up quickly. And so it's either happening now or in the future. There could be shortages that would impact the Russians, and President Trump alluded to that as well in his Truth Social post.
Well, let's also talk about just Russia's posture in Europe generally. The president also said that NATO should shoot down Russian aircrafts that enter its airspace. That would be a dramatic change in the posture up until this point. Do you agree? And what could the consequences be if Poland, for instance, shot down these drones that have been making it over the border?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, that one I consider dramatic because it's backing up Article 5, which is to say deterrence, trying to stop Russia from continuing these, frankly, attacks. These attacks, these incursions, we're calling them. But, if something had been hit, it would be an attack on the territory of Poland, Romania, and maybe Denmark, and Estonia, of course. So what we're trying to do is reestablish deterrence because clearly it's not working. Russia keeps doing it, and President Trump was helpful in this respect. He was saying, NATO allies, we need to come to the defense of any ally that's attacked in this way, and Russia should expect to have its aircraft shot down.
Okay, let's bring Andrea into the conversation now. Andrea, talk to us a little bit about the status of diplomatic efforts to end the war between Israel and Hamas, which is another thing that President Trump touched on in his speech. Is the decision by some Western leaders to recognize a Palestinian state having any impact at all on the decisions Israel's making?
Well, if anything, it is reaffirming and strengthening Israel's resolve to expand and continue the war against Hamas, the war in Gaza City. And with that, he has complete U.S. support. So it has isolated the U.S. and Israel, causing, diplomatic isolation, political fallout from that. But it is basically symbolic. All of the leaders involved, starting with Macron and certainly Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, and Starmer, know that this is condition-based. This is conditioned on a ceasefire, an end of the war, a Palestinian election, new Palestinian leadership, security agreements provided by an Arab coalition. So there are so many steps. And before all those steps, they have to make sure that Israel doesn't annex the West Bank and carry through its approved threat to take that last piece between North and South and cut up the West Bank so that there would be no Palestinian state. That makes it impossible to have a contiguous territory. And that is a very definite threat that Netanyahu is going to be bringing here when he comes at the end of this week. And he does not yet have a green light from the U.S. for that. But let me just weigh in for just a moment, because I've covered the Ukraine war, and our press corps is sending me notes from what Zelensky said afterwards. He is now describing this as a game changer. This is the very first time on Truth Social that the president has gone online and said that Ukraine can regain all of its territory, regain the territory that he's been fighting for since Russia invaded. And what Zelensky said just now plays right into what Evelyn, who knows this area so well, and who's been with all of us in Munich every year watching the evolution of the Zelensky-U.S. relationship, and how Zelensky warned us 2 years ago that with Advika, on that horrible trip, frankly, that they were going to begin to have to retreat. I was covering him then, and he said, if you don't help, this was when the U.S. had cut off aid to Ukraine, waiting for the supplemental. Lindsey Graham wasn't there. Yes, he usually led that delegation. And all this at the behest of Donald Trump, not even president yet. And then, of course, the president coming up with this arrangement where he provides the U.S. weapons to NATO, but not the weapons directly to Ukraine, and is not providing new shipments. But Zelensky is saying that this is a game changer. It's the first time that Donald Trump has said this. Now, what's interesting about shooting down, invoking Article 5 and shooting down drones or even MiGs now in Denmark, reportedly today, and this is, of course, after Estonia, Romania, and Poland were all had incursions from Russian drones into their airspace, and where there was an Emergency Security Council meeting yesterday morning on this very subject, and a passionate speech by the Polish foreign minister. But what Marco Rubio said on morning television today when asked this very question was, well, it's not a big deal, the Russian planes. We send them away in Alaska all the time. So the president has changed positions on shooting down or fighting back against Russian incursions since his national security advisor and Secretary of State was speaking just this morning at 7 a.m. and live on television. The evolution of Donald Trump at these photo ops, but this is the first time he has had a really positive meeting with Zelensky, certainly the first time since the Alaska summit. And it's clear that Putin is really wearing out his welcome. Right. One other thing, Vaughn mentioned Hungary. It's Hungary and Slovakia. When the president says that Europe should stop buying, that requires the entire EU to unanimously agree to something, and the Russian allies, who are his, MAGA supporters, and of course the Hungarian president shows up at CPAC meetings in Washington and Florida. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, quickly, Andrea, President Trump also attending a meeting with some Arab leaders. What do we expect would come out of that?
Well, certainly at that meeting, they're going to be talking about Gaza. They're going to be talking about the Israeli strike against Qatar, but talking about also the future of Gaza. And implicit in a lot of this is what Trump laid out to Netanyahu's surprise in February in an Oval Office meeting, when he first disclosed that they were thinking about displacing the Palestinians eventually and rebuilding Gaza with Arab and other private sector money. And that is not off the table. And that is considered by much of the world ethnic cleansing, and it is to the horror of Egypt and Jordan, who are neighbors, of course, to Gaza, and don't want to see that happen because that's a refugee crisis for them.
Okay, Andrea Mitchell on top of all of it for us, as always. Andrea, we appreciate it. We're going to turn now to chaos in a Florida courtroom as the verdict came down in the case of Ryan Ruth. That's the man accused of attempting to assassinate President Trump at his West Palm Beach golf course last year. This afternoon, a jury found Ruth found guilty on all 5 counts. And then, as the verdict was read, he grabbed a pen and attempted to stab himself in the neck. Marshals quickly and safely restrained Ruth. Ruth had pleaded not guilty to the charges and faces a potential life sentence in prison. Earlier, he capped his 2-week trial in which he served as his own attorney by delivering a brief and disjointed closing argument where he said no crime was committed since he never fired a shot at the president. Moments ago, President Trump reacted to the guilty verdict.
I'm very appreciative of the justice that was given and the way it was handled by Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche and everybody that it's been, and their team of people. It was really well handled, and it's very important. You can't let things like that happen.
Joining me now from the White House is the NBC News senior White House correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez. Obviously, we heard from the president there, who seemed very thankful for such a quick conviction. What else are we hearing from the White House on this case, Gabe?
Hi there, Ryan. Good afternoon. Well, certainly the president responding to this rather quickly, a short time after the verdict was read. Look, White House officials are echoing that. They are glad that this verdict came down, and they are very appreciative and complimentary of Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. Now, the president, in addition to that comment he made at the United Nations, he also posted on his social media platform saying that this was very meticulously handled by the judge and the jury. Of course, Judge Eileen Cannon has some history with Donald Trump. She, of course, dismissed that classified documents case in Florida. The defendant had raised some concerns about that, but ultimately nothing came of that. But there you see in the social media post the president going on to thank the person who spotted the suspect and calling this a big moment for justice in America. So again, the president responding rather quickly to this verdict and thanking all of those involved for the reaction and ultimately the guilty verdict, Ryan.
Okay, Gabe Gutierrez at the White House. Gabe, thank you for that. And we'll have more analysis on President Trump's speech to the United Nations and his meeting with world leaders still to come. But first, we're diving into the fallout from President Trump's Monday announcement advising women not to take acetaminophen during pregnancy. I'll speak with a doctor who's also a former White House policy advisor. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We're going to turn now to health officials across the world rejecting President Trump's warning not to use acetaminophen during pregnancy, saying there is no new research that warrants a change in guidance. Americans have been unpacking the president's comments and what it all means for their lives as doctors handle an onslaught of new questions from patients. Just 24 hours ago, the president, along with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., pinned the drug, also known by the brand name Tylenol, as the leading source for rising autism rates. Mr. Trump and his deputies suggested vaccines may also be a culprit, a claim that's been disproven by decades of medical research. Joining me now is one of those doctors probably dealing with a lot of phone calls, NBC News medical contributor and former Obama White House policy director, Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, thank you for being here. this is probably a very difficult question to answer in a short period of time, but can you break down where the facts are when it comes to acetaminophen during pregnancy use? Why is it one of the only pain relievers that can be used during pregnancy?
Yeah, I've had to get good at this, Ryan, so I've had to do it quickly. So it's one of the few pain relievers that we can use because other ones like nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory or Advil, as some people might know it, ibuprofen, can actually potentially pose harm to the fetus, and we have proof of that. What we've got with the evidence behind acetaminophen is that there are observational studies that do show an association between prenatal acetaminophen use and neurodevelopmental outcomes. An association is not causation. And then when we use stronger design studies, like studies of twins, which is incredibly strong, if one twin in the pregnancy got something because of the way the maternal fetal cord, but the other one didn't, so non-identical twins, you can actually study what the effects are, which is impressive. So when you use stronger designs to reduce that confounding effect, then you actually do not see the causal relationship. And the third data point, Ryan, just important to say, there's been a declining use of Tylenol in pregnancy over the last several years. So that's not consistent with what the president said with these increasing rates of autism.
So how is this kind of messaging from the administration landing for families who have children with autism? Does assigning an unproven cause for autism further stigmatize that community? How are they responding?
It does. It kind of exacerbates already like sentiments of guilt that take place in there is not a single family I know with a family member with an autism spectrum disorder that does not relive, Ryan, every single moment, whether it's pregnancy or childhood or schooling. Trust me, I know it personally. I know it deeply. They think every minute of every day about what they could do, can do, should do. So it's only just making that fire burn harder. And it's also just making it harder for us as health professionals, Ryan. I would love to be sitting here and talking to you about how we can solve and cure cancer and do things that are exciting with science. I do not want to relive and deliberate science that has been so far put to rest. I was hoping the president would show me new science. There has not been any of that on any of the social feeds or any of the White House, FDA, or HHS websites. And
I'm a father of 4. It's so hard to make these decisions about your kid's health. When my wife was pregnant, how important is the messaging from a public policy perspective in the decisions that people make when it comes to public health?
Well, words matter, right? We saw this in April of 2020 when the president had suggested treatments like bleach or sunlight for the coronavirus at that time. So words matter. They've got a ripple effect. And my fear, and it's just worth saying, Ryan, my fear is that one woman who's pregnant that's got a high fever, not realizing the high fever itself, Ryan, can actually potentially be just as risky for some of these neurodevelopmental disorders as treating the fever. But my one fear is that now we have even just one person that listens to this and potentially does not have a dialogue with their doctor, because guess what? Hard to get a hold of me on a regular basis. So that's going to be what happens, and I bet it's already happened.
And I hate to tell a pregnant mom just to suck it up. I don't think that's a solution to anything.
Don't say that to anybody. All right. Ever, but especially a mom. That's right.
Dr. Patel, thank you for your expertise as always. We appreciate it. Up next, the deadline to avoid a government shutdown is just a week away, and lawmakers are facing another hurdle as President Trump cancels a meeting with top Democrats. My panel joins me to break it down when we return. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. It may only be Tuesday. How is it only Tuesday? We already have a lot to digest this week. And joining me to do just that is our panel, Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter at Notice, Maria Teresa Kumar, the president and CEO of Voto Latino, and NBC News contributor, and Matt Gorman, former senior communications advisor for Tim Scott's presidential campaign. So Daniela, in addition to everything else we have to talk about today, we are only about a week from a potential government shutdown. And today we found out President Trump is not going to meet with congressional Democratic leaders to try and hash things out. You and I both cover Congress every day. It seems hard to imagine a scenario where we're not shutting the government down here next week.
If you had asked me yesterday, Ryan, if I thought that the government was going to be funded, especially knowing that on Thursday there was potentially going to be a meeting, the first meeting ever between Jeffries and Trump, and Schumer, of course, joining that meeting, I would have said, yeah, there's not going to be a shutdown. Now I'm thinking there's probably going to be a shutdown. I mean, he canceled it on a Truth Social post this morning, very last minute. No one saw that coming. It came even, I think, 2 hours after Democratic leaders put out a statement saying they were hoping to find a solution in this meeting. Really, this is going to come down to whether Democrats are going to be able to even get anything in these negotiations. They seem to be really sticking to their demands on hopefully something on healthcare. They've already tried to put their own resolution on the floor last week that failed. Republican leaders saying we're not going to do anything either. So what comes after this, we're all waiting to see.
And the language, Maria Teresa, it reeks of the precipice of a shutdown. We had Leader Jeffries reacting to Trump's cancellation on X, saying in part, Trump always chickens out, the taco reference they use all the time. It seems as though they're trying to goad Trump a little bit here. How much of this is the scar tissue from the funding standoff in the spring, where Democratic leaders like Jeffries and Schumer in particular took so much heat from the base from caving to Republicans?
Well, I think, just to peek behind the curtain, Jeffries was never aligned with Schumer caving into the first government shutdown. And so this is basically saying, and Schumer's, the first time he agreed to prevent that government shutdown was, well, at least we have the courts resisting the Trump agenda. And imagine if we're not paying the courts, who's going to resist the Trump agenda? And now what you're saying is like, well, you know what, the courts are not really resisting the Trump agenda. And so Jeffrey's opinion, from what I understand, is like, how can we continue funding a government that now basically emboldens the right to take away Medicaid, to take away necessary issues that people depend on? And so this whole thing of the healthcare piece of it, it's super important. And so one of the things that they're also going to remind the American public is that, wait, it wasn't the Democrats that took away your Medicaid. We're trying to save it for you. And if anything, this tension that he's creating is Schumer ceding some ground to Jeffries so that he can help win the midterm elections.
So, Matt, we have reporting, my colleagues Melanie Zanona and Julie Sirkin, that it was actually John Thune and Mike Johnson who said, Donald Trump, don't take this meeting. We don't need you to do this. Is the posture here for the Republicans to we've got an offer here on the table. If you don't vote for it, the Democrats are going to be blamed for the shutdown?
There's no reason to meet. Yeah, there's no reason to meet. There's an offer on the table. It passed the House, up in the Senate. Look, I've been on the other side of these things where you're trying to extract something from, the opposing president's party. It never ends well. The person moving towards a shutdown inevitably loses this. Now, I've also been on the other side of it too, where in a year from now, no one's going to care either way who won or lost a shutdown. It's a couple of days of press, and it's a big deal. But I remember back in 2013 when they shut the government down with Ted Cruz over Obamacare, no one cared about the 2014 historic midterms for our party. So right now, I agree. I think things are likely headed for a shutdown, but that's much of a Schumer issue, as we talked about before, in his internal politics than anything else.
But isn't there a win potentially here for some frontline Republicans in expanding the ACA credits? I mean, there's a lot that would like to see that happen. Couldn't they extend the olive branch and then just get that over the table?
The leverage has always been in past shutdown fights that we couldn't pass our own bill. We were always struggling to cobble together a majority just to pass something to get to the Senate. Yeah. That's not the case anymore, and we've seen rarely where frontline Republicans have defected on major Republican priorities.
Maria Teresa, can Democrats win the argument here, though, that the Republicans are to blame for this if they're turning down, which is essentially a clean continuing resolution?
Well, I mean, I think that the Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House. And what the Democrats are saying is, like, we actually want to be able to negotiate. And to your point earlier, there are plenty of Republicans who actually want the expansion and protection of the ACA. And so that is where the friction is. I think that Thune and Johnson, they're actually scared to open that aperture with this idea that perhaps they will will lose some Republicans.
I mean, there is a possibility they get in a room with Trump and Trump's like, why can't we just extend this? Let's just do it. And that might be why they didn't want the meeting. So, Danielle, let's talk more about health care. I want to turn to what we heard from President Trump and his top health officials yesterday. Take a listen to what the president had to say about his opinions on acetaminophen in pregnancy as well as vaccines.
There's a very strong recommendation, maybe stronger from me than from the group, because they're waiting for certain studies. I just want to say, I want to say it like it is. Don't take Tylenol. It's easy for me to say, tough it out, but sometimes in life, with a lot of other things, you have to tough it out. Making these statements from me, I'm not making them from these doctors, because when they talk about, different results, different studies, I talk about a lot of common sense, and they have that too.
So one of the things that Donald Trump ran on was restoring integrity and confidence in the CDC and these public health agencies. You could argue whether or not that trust didn't exist. But if he's getting out ahead of these people that he's installed, how is he continuing to build that trust with these agencies so that the people know the information they provide is worth taking?
And Ryan, yes, completely agree. But also it doesn't help that he has experts in this field also asking the same question, saying, where is the data linking these two things, including Senator Cassidy, the chairman of the Senate Help Committee, who's in charge of this whole thing, saying today, I would like to see the data that President Donald Trump is referencing. You know, he's someone who clashes a lot with Trump, voted to impeach him in the trial years ago, is running for re-election. But it's interesting that a member of his own party is asking these questions, wondering what happened yesterday and what this press conference was without any concrete data explaining these links, saying that Tylenol for pregnant women leads to autism.
And Maria Teresa, I think back to how many elections have been decided by swing female voters. And we've called them a lot of different things, soccer moms, national security moms. I think they're calling them weighted vest moms in this election cycle.
I need to grab one.
Yeah. But, you know, the president's never been pregnant. Most of the people standing behind him have never been pregnant. Yeah. What does it say if you're a mom at home, Republican or Democrat, and he's telling you when you have a fever and you're 8 months pregnant to tough it out? I mean, what's the optics there?
So I think one of the biggest challenges as a mother, when he was in his first presidency, told us not to take a vaccine, when he told us not to wear a mask, in doing so, using his post, it takes away a mother's agency to do the right thing for their family. It obfuscates real information. Tylenol linkage to autism, it's not that the jury's out. Autism was discovered in the 1900s, and Tylenol was was actually not developed until I think the 40s or the 50s. And so I think that it is. We could talk about the political lens, but I think as a mother, this idea that a leader is actually putting doubt into your mind, where your previous guest, Dr. Patel, was saying, what if you have a fever and you're pregnant, and your best protection in that moment is to take Tylenol? But that is, I think that type of disinformation is not just a nice to have conversation. It actually can severely hurt people, and in some cases cost people lives.
Matt, I'll give you the last word. Are we underplaying this or overplaying it?
I mean, how many times in the last 8 months we thought this was going to be the thing to decide the midterm? I am very interested too. Tylenol's been, as a company, been fairly silent. I think it's owned by Bayer. I'm very surprised that it's a reputational crisis for them. I haven't heard much from them at all about this.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Daniela, Maria Teresa, Matt, thank you guys all for being here. After the break, a newly elected Virginia Democratic Congressman James Walkinshaw will join me to discuss that looming shutdown deadline and much more. He'll be here in studio. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, with just 1 week until the government funding deadline, Congress doesn't look any closer to avoiding a shutdown. In the midst of that standoff, President Trump canceling a meeting with Democratic leaders on how to prevent that shutdown. Sources tell NBC News that cancellation came at the urging of the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Joining me now is the newest member of the U.S. House of Representatives, at least for a couple more weeks, the Democratic Congressman from Virginia, James Walkinshaw. Congressman, first of all, congrats on your win. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk about this government funding deadline. You, as much as any member of Congress, uniquely feel this because of the preponderance of federal workers that you have in your district. How serious should we be taking this threat, and what can possibly be done to avoid it?
Well, I think we should take it very seriously. You know, in the House, Republicans rammed through a partisan spending bill. They refused to address the looming health care crisis, and then they skipped town. And now we learned today that Speaker Johnson discouraged President Trump from even meeting with Democratic leaders to discuss the possibility of a bipartisan approach to this, which is what the American people want. So I hope we can avoid the shutdown, but at this moment, things don't look good.
Republicans are arguing this is just a 7-week stopgap, that it's largely clean, as the definition that they use on Capitol Hill. Wouldn't that benefit your constituents the most, to give 7 more weeks to hash out some of these disagreements that you have with Republicans and pass the full appropriations bills, as opposed to shutting the government down now?
2 points that I'll make. One, the healthcare crisis is urgent. I was visiting a community health clinic in my district earlier today, and they are preparing now for the possibility of huge numbers of newly uninsured folks coming in to try to get care because of the skyrocketing ACA premiums we're about to see. Those notices are going out. Second point, for the folks that I represent in Northern Virginia, many of them, Donald Trump has already shut down parts of the federal government. USAID shut down, Department of Education shut down, CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, effectively shut down. So this is kind of a Trump shutdown part 2. we've been experiencing Trump shutdown part 1 for the last 9 months.
And so what is a win? What do you want out of these negotiations? Is it just the ACA subsidies? Do you want to restore the cuts to Medicaid that went through in the funding package or the reconciliation package over the summer? It seems as though there isn't a consistent message right now from Democrats as to what it would take to agree to at least a 7-week extension of government funding.
Well, Democrats have put forward an alternative that includes the extension of the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies to prevent those skyrocketing increases, restores the $1 trillion cut to Medicaid that will kick millions of people off their health care coverage, ensures that the Trump administration actually follows through and implements the programs that the bill funds. So we put forward a proposal. And that's why there needs to be a meeting. President Trump needs to sit down and meet with Democrats to try to reach a compromise. He's been unwilling to do that.
Okay, let's talk about your early days here in Congress. You have been appointed to a very powerful committee, the Oversight Committee. Your mentor, Jerry Connolly, was once the ranking member of that committee. You've been investigating the handling of the Epstein case. That's been a big focus of the committee right now. The former Labor Secretary, Alex Acosta, testified before the committee on Friday. First, tell me your response to what you heard from that interview, and what more should we expect from your committee?
What I heard in that interview, and I participated in more than an hour of the interview with Mr. Acosta, is consistent with what we've seen from Trump and his allies in Congress and Mr. Acosta throughout this Epstein saga. Callous disregard, in my view, for the victims, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Mr. Acosta showed no remorse for the sweetheart deal that he signed off on for Jeffrey Epstein that allowed Epstein to continue raping and abusing women and girls. And it was deeply, deeply troubling to me. I also find it very hard to believe that after he signed off on that deal, years later, Donald Trump made him his labor secretary. And Trump knew about that deal when he made him his labor secretary. Of all the Republicans on the planet, Donald Trump could have named labor secretary. He picked the guy who gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal. Why?
Yeah. But the Republicans are critical of the way the minority members like yourself have handled this investigation because they feel like you've focused too much on Donald Trump and not enough on the victims and seeking justice. How would you respond to that criticism?
Well, look, I think there's a lot to learn about Donald Trump's relationship with Epstein and his role here. And there's a very easy solution. And I've said this, Chairman Comer, go down to the floor and sign the discharge petition to release the files. And if Trump isn't implicated, if he's barely mentioned, no problem, we can all move on. Why is Trump preventing Republicans, preventing his administration from releasing the full files?
And it looks like you're close to having that discharge petition at least make it to the floor. You've signed it already. It was one of your first acts as a member of Congress. Democrats feel like their chances are good in a special election tonight in Arizona. Is there the possibility, though, that there really isn't any more information in these files that even if they were to be all released, that you maybe wouldn't get the answers that you're looking for? What else needs to be done?
Well, here's what we know. There are survivors out there who still haven't had the opportunity to fully tell their story. We've heard that from some of them, so that opportunity needs to be afforded to them. I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions. And again, I come back to why is Trump not allowing his administration to release the files? If what you're saying is true, and perhaps it is, why not release the files?
Yeah.
He hasn't.
All right, let's talk about another interview that was before your committee last week, and that's the former Biden Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients. Sources tell me that Zients testified that President Biden's decision-making had slowed. His memory was getting worse. What did you make of that testimony, and did it concern you at all about the last parts of President Biden's presidency?
Well, look, I have deep respect for President Biden and his service to the nation. But Joe Biden is on a beach in Delaware or at his beach house in Delaware right now. Donald Trump is the 79-year-old president of the United States that I'm deeply concerned about. I wasn't in Congress in 2024. I think clearly President Biden should have stepped aside from the race sooner. But right now, Donald Trump is the president. I'm concerned about his capacity and his ability to do the job when he won't even meet with congressional leaders.
Do you think Democrats have reconciled that part of the Biden presidency enough, though? And do you feel as though there's enough of an effort by Democrats to pass the baton to the next generation? I know you would be a younger member of Congress, but do you think the party's doing that enough, especially ahead of these 2026 midterms?
I can tell you, as I joined the House Democratic Caucus 10 or 11 days ago, I've been very pleasantly surprised by the new generations of leadership that we have. You know, Hakeem Jeffries represents a new generation of leadership. On our committee, the Oversight Committee, ranking member Robert Garcia. We have a lot of dynamic young leaders in the House Democratic caucus. So I think we're making that shift. We've made that shift, and it will continue.
Okay. Congressman James Walkinshaw, very soon on the job, already on the set of Meet the Press. You're doing very well. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
All right. And we're staying in Virginia for a closer look at that state's gubernatorial election, with voters already headed to the polls. That's after a quick break. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Early voting is open in the first of this year's key gubernatorial elections as Virginians head to the polls to make their pick between Democratic former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger and Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earls-Sears. NBC's Gary Grumbach hit the road in Virginia, taking a closer look at the candidates and talking to voters about what they are looking for in their next governor.
Virginians want a governor who's going to put Virginia first.
It's about our future, and it starts today with your vote, with your vote, with your vote.
It's always a closely watched race, and this year is no different.
I'm no typical politician.
I believe that public service is too important for political nonsense.
Virginians are heading to the polls to pick their next governor as early voting is underway in the Commonwealth's off-year elections. Winsome Sears, Virginia's current lieutenant governor, looking to repeat Republicans' 2021 success when political newcomer Glenn Youngkin defeated Democratic heavyweight Terry McAuliffe.
All righty, Virginia, we won this thing!
Sears focusing her campaign on the issues of parents' rights, pushing through legislation that Youngkin couldn't, like a car tax elimination, and immigration.
We will not give sanctuary to the criminal, illegal immigrants. If you're a criminal and you're illegally here, you gotta go home. You're taking opportunity to wreck lives. I'm talking about pedophiles and murderers and thieves.
Abigail Spanberger, a former congresswoman and former CIA officer, relying on the impacts of Trump's cuts to the federal workforce and the Virginia GOP's reaction to them to help her case.
It's not just federal workers who have lost their jobs. It's small business owners. It's restaurant owners. It's government contracting firms. We've seen just a constriction of various parts of our economy.
On the airwaves, Sears has attacked Spanberger over her stance on the rights of transgender students.
She voted to allow men in girls' sports, bathrooms, and locker rooms.
With Spanberger hitting back, focusing on economic issues.
Trump's budget bill is raising costs, and Winsome Earls-Sears says,
the bill, as you know now, does so many great things.
No.
But it appears those social issues are on the minds of voters.
I don't want boys in girls' lockers. We teach our girls modesty, not be undressing in front of boys who claim they're girls. We've got two sexes, male, female.
I'm also concerned about the fact that transgender rights are being violated. I think that they have just as much as right to exist, and as long as it's freely on their own.
I think we need to get back to some sense of normalcy and working together, and I'm not seeing that.
President Trump on Friday not committing to supporting the GOP ticket in the nation's 12th largest state.
Are you planning on campaigning for Winsome Sears, John Reed, or Jesse Mayaris?
Well, I'm going to have to look at some of them. As you know, it's sort of a semi-local election.
It comes as Spanberger has been out fundraising Winsome Sears for months, raising almost 3 times as much as Sears. And in a Christopher Newport University poll released this week, 52% of likely voters say they'd vote for Spanberger, though other polling in recent weeks shows a closer race. Also on the ballot, races for Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General, and all 100 members of the House of Delegates, as Democrats hope to maintain control of the lower chamber. And this year, Virginia voters have 45 days to vote. Candidates hoping that leaves no excuse, with so much on the line.
Now, there are a lot of quirky things about Virginia politics, but one of the most interesting is that in 9 of the last 10 gubernatorial elections here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the party in the White House has lost the gubernatorial election here in Virginia. Back to you.
Okay, thanks to Gary Grumbach for that report. We're going to be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And remember, you can always get more Meet the Press with the Meet the Press podcast. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. But don't go anywhere, because there's always more news ahead on NBC News Now. Thanks so much for watching.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.